Good evening, Mr. Mehta. Now that we're all warmed up, I must share with the audience. When Mr. Mehta entered the venue, I was looking over his shoulder and not in his eyes. And he was slightly surprised. You see, it wasn't just me who he had fooled. He's quite a prankster at heart. In his childhood, he convinced his sister that he was no less than Mahatma Gandhi's reincarnation, owing the size of his ears. And since then, Mr. Mehta has gone to achieve mammoth tasks throughout his career. Mr. Mehta, you built NASSCOM, an association, an institution from the ground up. Once upon a time, you were invited for a consultation in a room filled with hardware industry associations by a gentleman who was considered a demigod by the industry, the DOE secretary. And at the time, you politely declined, perhaps because this gentleman found the two indistinguishable. Since then, you managed to convert this gentleman to not only consult NASSCOM on every policy decision that contained the word software, you also famously got him to comment that in NASSCOM, N stands for nuts, A stands for ass, S stands for stupid, S stands for screwball, C stands for crazy, O stands for oddball, M stands for mad, and I am the leader of this group. How did you manage to achieve this, Mr. Mehta? You write in your book, The Maverick Effect, about fighting all odds and achieving mammoth tasks. How did you do this when all the odds were stacked clearly against your favor?
First of all, it's not me. I say we are 40 companies who started NASSCOM. Everyone contributed in making this change. I'm a narrator. I'm a story writer here, where I put all the pieces together. And just to give a little background here, I believe very strongly that the fortunes of billion people change thanks to the IT industry. And IT industry enjoyed 30% compounded growth over 30 years thanks to NASSCOM. And NASSCOM is a very unique institute, has a very different way of working. And that's what differentiated in terms of contributing to the IT industry's growth and in turn changing the country. But about 3 years back, when I looked around, okay, who changed India? And I would read the books of public sector managers, I would read the books of RBI governors, politicians. And first thing I would do is look at the index, see whether the word NASSCOM is there or not. You'll be surprised. Not a single place NASSCOM was covered. I would say how much they talked about technology industry. Hardly anything. Now here is an industry where 30 years back we were Fakir's country, third world country. We had mortgaged our gold in 91 to the Bank of England. And suddenly today we are all talking about we are a global tech powerhouse. We talked about the flywheel that has been built now in India. Will India be a massive success? Who built that flywheel? And I realized that if I believe in this, and there's also a proverb which says, if the lions had historians, the story of hunting would not glorify the hunters. So if the NASSCOM story is not written, I can't blame anybody else, and I must write that story. So I wrote that story. So from that perspective, I'm a narrator or a historian, which talks about how we change India indirectly. Coming to Mr. Vittal, I mean, it's a very long story. I don't know how much time we have, but I can go on and on. To quickly, the NASSCOM, when we started, we took some key decisions. One was we will not bribe. We had something like 150 regulations strangulating or choking our industry. Rules of the physical world were applied to intangible software. But we decided, maybe we all came from middle class values or whatever it may be, we will not bribe for any policy change, any officer. It was a hard decision, but it was a collective wisdom of all of us at that point in time. We also took a decision that we will not just do lobbying work as other associations, but we will build the ecosystem for the industry. Like we knew, for example, that the total outsourcing pipe globally was $300 billion. What was accessible to us was hardly $1 billion. And the reason is partly these 150 regulations, plus there are lots of issues on supply chain in terms of people skills, availability, the infrastructure required for hardware to be done and whatnot. So we said we will focus on building the ecosystem for the industry. And like that, we kept working on it. But most important was that fiercely competing competitors, whether it's Mr. Kohli or Narayan Murthy or Azim or whoever it is, we brought them together under one platform. We say the NASSCOM platform will be an independent, neutral, transparent platform. which will allow these individuals to talk to each other freely, keep at an aggregate level, and solve India's problems. Again, keeping India first, not the particular group of companies focus, but what is relevant for India. And then how we moved on. I'll give you one story before I hand over the mic to you again. It's a story, we call it Who is Us? That was a time when multinationals were not allowed to own 100% ownership in India. They approached NASSCOM saying, for our back office work, you guys are doing a brilliant work in our other departments. Why won't you allow us to set up a 100% owned back office in India? Now, we looked at it in our council and we said, what do we do? On the one side, there's a big fear that these multinationals will come, take away our people, paying twice the salary, or under the garb of back office, they'll shift the work which we are doing back to them. So why should we allow it? Protection and again, using the regulation was a very natural way of doing things in those days. So we said, then somebody else argued, saying, no, but we will learn a number of quality processes that the multinationals will bring in. Plus this big pie, which is not accessible to us. If we create that ease of doing business from this perspective, we would open up large spaces for us for the growth. Still, we were not sure, what do we do? At that point, somebody in the group said, that is what we allow at NASSCOM, creative juices to flow of even the fiercely competing CEOs. Somebody said, and that time a Harvard Business article had come out in which talked about, in the USA there was a debate, okay, who is us? Are we IBM, Motorola, Whirlpool, or are we Sony, Toyota, and other three companies? There's a big debate there. Probably that gave us a clue. So we started asking, who is us? And somebody said at that point, whoever develops human capital of India is us. And who doesn't is not us. So even an Indian company is not us. So I think we have a lot to learn. These MNCs will develop the human capital of India. We must allow them to come. We approached Dr. Manmohan Singh at that time. He was the finance minister. And we said, we recommend 100% ownership. One of the officers said, tum kiske dalal ho? Another officer said, East India company ko वापस तुम उनको देश को बेचने आ गए. We were really ridiculed. But we were ready with the facts, data analysis, a vision about foreign action that we can earn, number of jobs we can create, and so on and so forth. Dr. Manmohan Singh accepted that proposal. Now, that single decision of allowing MNCs, today in India, we have 1,800 R&D centers employing more than 1.2 million engineers, $35 billion of revenue, and many of them, like SAP and whatnot, they're representing themselves at the board level, co-creating future for their companies. Phenomenal. But that decision of going against the protection and again, before we going to the finance minister, we asked Mr. Kohli, Azim, Murthy, everybody, are you agreeable? And they all agreed. So that's the reason behind, and the way we did it was by building trust with the bureaucrats, which we'll talk later about how we convinced Mr. Vittal to be on our side.
Mr. Mehta, you spoke about being a history and a narrative buff. You also shared some insights of moving from the back office to the boardroom. Speaking of the great playwright William Shakespeare, he says, some men are born great, some men achieve greatness, and some men have greatness thrust upon them. Speaking of William Shakespeare's brand of greatness, you write on page 133 of your book that the IT industry and the BPO industry in India belong firmly to the second class of greatness, and this was achieved not by chance but by hard work. From the back office to the boardroom, the transition from the BPO to the BPM couldn't have been easy. Today, with $38 billion in revenue, 1.3 million direct jobs, countless indirect jobs with a global market share of 36%, we are a world leader. How did you manage to convince the wide spectrum of entrepreneurs, regulators, and stakeholders and build consensus to effect this change?
Sangeeta here. She is one of the person behind driving that change. Sangeeta is the executive vice president of NASSCOM, and she has been with NASSCOM for the last, right from the beginning till today, real pillar of NASSCOM and the IT industry. Now she can tell you a lot more about how we did in terms of, but fundamentally it was at the council level. We realized that the technology is changing, opening up newer opportunities. Some could be a signal, some could be a noise, mostly noise. Which one to pick, which will be a opportunity for India in terms of earning, exchange, creating jobs, and whatnot. So that's where the BPM got or BPO got identified because it moved from IT to workflow, and that's how we felt, yeah, this is all integrated, and this is a great strategy for us to push it, and that's how we brought or as a supported BPM industry and gave birth and nurtured, and we have a standard now, you can say, a playbook for any new service now. BPO is one, then we had engineering services, we had GCC or Global Capability Centers. Each new service that we bring in, we apply this playbook in terms of nurturing it so that it becomes a multi-billion-dollar segment.
Mr. Mehta, the coming of age challenges of startups are well understood. We have several companies in our midst today. HP, Microsoft, Apple, Google were all garage startups before they were corporatized into larger offices. But the coming of age story of NASSCOM happened due to a tragic incident, the sudden demise of Mr. Devang Mehta, someone you had spotted, scouted, hired, and groomed over Pani Puri at Bengal Sweets and South Indian lunches at Sarvana Bhavan to fill big shoes. An eccentric wartime leader, his sudden demise was no less than a shock. And let me preface this by saying that this was a time when the industry was earning $6 billion in revenue and had created 1 million direct jobs. You were also under political pressure to take over the reins of NASSCOM. How did you deal with this transition?
I don't know how many of you know about Devang, but Dr. Sumandra Gosal of London School of Economics, he used to say the 1,000 years of downward spiral of India has been arrested by IT industry. NASSCOM was leading the initiative and Devang was the sutradhar driving it. Fantastic contribution by Devang. He was 29 when he joined. When he passed away, he was 39. Now, frankly, we didn't have a succession planning in place. He was doing so well, and we just didn't know. We just didn't anticipate that he would pass away so suddenly in Australia. So we were shocked in that sense from the beginning. But then on the other end, we had already built a great base of $6 billion, as you just say, of the top line. And I think we're employing 1 million people. So we had a responsibility in some sense of what do we do with NASSCOM next? So there were number of, you can say, one was about we had competing organizations trying to say, close down NASSCOM and we would represent you. But we asked all our council members, we called an emergency meeting, and from TCS, Infosys, Wipro, everybody supported, saying, no, NASSCOM must continue as a independent organization. It reflects that software or the intangible, which makes it easier for the policy making and whatnot. So we decided that we will go ahead. But still, how do you find a successor so quickly? So that time, Sangeeta, for example, said, you don't worry about the NASSCOM secretariat. We'll take care of it. Firoz from Delhi, he was at that time NASSCOM chairman. And he said, Harish bhai, you don't worry. You go and put in the best effort to get the best person to run NASSCOM. I will go to NASSCOM office every alternate day till we have a new person in place. Just imagine somebody who is very senior vice NASSCOM chairman, as well as he was the corporate affairs executive vice president of TCS, committing his time and effort to keep the NASSCOM going. I got a call from Murli Devra, he was MP from the Congress party. He said, "अरे तू बैठ जा उस जगह पे, देश का भविष्य का सवाल है." I was very surprised to see politicians are equally sensitive about the potential of what our industry had contributed and what it would contribute in the years to come. So I said, Murli bhai, hold on, we have formed a committee and we would be looking for the best of best Indian to run NASSCOM at that. And so we'll come back to you. In case it doesn't happen, I'm there to take it over. Then we appointed Conferry and Geeta Deng, again from Delhi. She was in charge of finding the best person for us. We selected 10 domain areas, and in each domain area we told her, find the 10 best Indians who would be potential NASSCOM president. She came up with the list. None of them knew that none of them were looking for a job at NASSCOM. None of them knew their name is being considered. But it was our intention to get the best of best person to come in. And these segments for IT industry corporate sector, government, NRI, and whatnot. So we said, looked at every individual. And then, of course, Geeta talked to him, started calling one by one. 80s said no. We jumped in number of times to sell the NASSCOM vision to them. Finally, it was down to 20, then down to 10. Then we met Azim. Azim, you tell us now. So quickly, he knew 6, 7 of them got eliminated. And then 3 remained. And then finally, Kiran Karnik was selected. And when Kiran came in, at the same time 9/11 happened. And Murli, they were again called me. Arey, kaise banda le aaya tum? Bola, Kiran, Murli bhai, he's a short, he's a very quiet person. And by design, we have selected him with that personality. Because Devang was bigger than life. And at that point, he was started making mistakes which were not acceptable to us. So we wanted exactly the opposite personality. But same patriotism, same intellectual power and all other, which Kiran fitted in very well. And when the 9/11 happened, again, big, huge worries about the industry. But the way he articulated, he proved to everybody that he is as good as Devang. And then again, Murli bhai called me and says, "Arey, acha banda dhunda hai." So that's what happened during this whole entire succession planning process.
Mr. Mehta, as a young boy, you went to a Jain school and you firmly believed in the tenets of aparigraha and anekantvad. Thereafter, you went on to the US to complete your studies. You gave up a PhD, much like I did, to return to India. Your father had a film distribution business that you tried to revive, and you then after went out to work in the IT industry through Onward Technologies as well as NASSCOM. Would you like to tell us a little about your tryst with destiny and the Maverick Effect?
The Maverick Effect is, going back to the example of who is us, that fiercely competing competitors sitting on a independent, neutral platform and taking a decision which is good for India with a single voice. Nobody would go behind and tell the bureaucrats, I don't agree with what NASSCOM has presented. That spirit was maintained. And I'm sure. Okay.
We have one last question after.
So that what do you call? I call that as the Maverick Effect. It is not just one Maverick, but it is all the Mavericks coming together and making policy changes and growing the industry. So that was the part of it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mehta. On a parting note, you once met Mr. Robert Schwer of the World Bank. And after much convincing, you managed to convince this gentleman that the Indian software services exports industry has the potential to be $1 billion industry at a time when the industry revenue was $150 million US. What do you think lies ahead for the IT industry's contribution to achieving the trillion dollar digital economy target?
First of all, when you talk $1 billion, same Mr. Vittal, who was not trusting us, he joked at us saying, do you know how many zeros are in a billion? When we were saying $1 billion as a projection for the industry, same person changed. And again, he liked being our trustworthiness, which we created. And there are a number of stories in the book about how we created that trust. So going forward, today, in my book also I've written, I've gone beyond $1 trillion digital economy. I have said, and in NASSCOM also we said, think big, always. So when we were nothing, we started thinking of $1 billion. When we were billion, we started dreaming of 50 billion. When we were approaching 50 billion, we started dreaming of 200 billion. When we crossed 200, now we are dreaming of $350 billion. So in the same spirit, in my book also, I'm going beyond $1 trillion economy. So why can't we create Sone Ki Chidiya version 2.0? And that requires two things, in my view. One is the cultural transformation, which I have identified in my chapter 14, as I call it, the structural problems of India, where we all have to work on in changing, making that change happen. And the second piece is, of course, the technology-driven, where I have said that we should create 1 million technopreneurs in the country. Each entrepreneur creating maybe anywhere from 30 to 300 jobs. India needs to create 90 million jobs. So we need to create 1 million technopreneurs from that perspective to create the 90 million jobs. And then only we will see the Sone Ki Chidiya version 2.0, at least economically. And then we get the cultural pieces, then we get the real Sone Ki Chidiya.
Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Mehta. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you.